Hi everyone. Today's episode is going to be focused on SiriusXM, which is a streaming company based in North America. And SiriusXM is a very big user of Scala. And today's guest is Luka Jacobowitz, who is a staff software engineer at Sirius, and Damian Mazurkiewicz, who is a director of engineering at SiriusXM in Poland. So please welcome Luka and Damian. So hi Luka, hi Damian. I'm really happy to have you here.
Hello.
Oh, nice to see you again.
Yeah. So I know that both of you works at SiriusXM, and as far as I know, SiriusXM is pretty big in the US and in North America generally, but maybe not so much in Europe or the rest of the world. So could you explain a bit like what is Sirius and what kind of services do you offer?
Sure. Yeah, like you said, I think we are not very well known in Europe. So we are a leading audio entertainment company in North America. With a focus on audio businesses. So our flagship subscription entertainment service is called SiriusXM, and it offers a wide range of channels and exclusive content featuring music, sports, news, talk shows, and more. So we have rights to Formula One, MLB, NFL, NBA, there's American football, there's soccer, although I should be saying football because we are in Europe.
Yeah.
At least I am in Europe. Look, I think you're in the US, so soccer is fine. And I think originally our focus was on satellite radio. So, for example, if you live in the remote or rural area and you're driving from the United States, you could basically listen to our content from the in-car. And it was all through satellite radio. That is still our focus, but since then we have also expanded to IP or kind of over internet broadcasting, right? So we now support also next generation platform that focuses on other platforms outside the car. So those are mobile apps like Android, iOS, web, smart speakers, connected devices, and more. So right now our focus is both kind of satellite radio and this in-car experience through satellite radio, but we can also now provide over internet connections and content.
Yeah, I guess the network in rural, in the US and maybe in Canada may not be amazing, so it probably makes sense. Do you guys use the SpaceX satellite system, or do you have your own?
That's a good question. We launched satellites before, so we must have our own satellites, at least to some degree. But yeah, I'm not an expert in that at all.
Yeah, no worries. I was just curious.
We actually own our own satellites. I don't know how many, but yeah, we have our own actually.
Interesting. So, and within Sirius, could you tell me a bit what are your responsibilities? Like, for example, Luka, what are you mostly working on?
Yeah. So I'm a staff engineer for the user services organization. So we had a lot of things in terms of authentication, sign up, sign in, all of the good stuff. And as a staff engineer, I'm really not really on one project in particular. I'm really, kind of doing a lot of context switching, helping out where I can. Right now, I'm moderating a solutions committee to one of the projects is we try to expand our reach and go to new platforms. I can't really say which one it is, but and another project that I'm working on a lot is around data migration. So we relaunched SiriusXM platform back in December of last year. Okay. And, as with every big relaunch, there's a lot of data to migrate, and a lot of this stuff is ongoing. There's more data to migrate. And
so is it the new platform you mentioned, the one that is written in Scala? It's the one you launched it in December last year? Okay, interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And is the old one still working, or have you finished the transition, or are they both working in parallel?
So a lot of it is working in parallel. We've managed to shut off, functionality on the old system, but there is still a lot of it that is, driven by that, especially around like all of the satellite stuff. That's mainly driven by the existing platform. The focus of the launch was mainly around new streaming based, and streaming I mean like IP based subscriptions and the like. So think Android, iOS, web, smart speakers, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so it was more about like adding new features on the new platform rather than replacing the old one.
In some ways, I mean, we've also replaced a lot because prior to the December launch, we did have, support for iOS, Android, and web, and a lot of these clients. But we basically redesigned all of it to kind of, modernize it and replatform it. Yeah.
Cool. Nice. And Damian, could you also talk about what you're doing?
So I lead two domains within platform services. So one is called content services, that is responsible for discovery and browse experience, search, recommendations, content management, and users library, which is kind of like your favorites. And a second domain I lead is called Platform Services Enablement Team. And that team is responsible for API tooling, API registry, and the Scala ecosystem within SiriusXM new platform. So for content services, our major focus right now is working on semantic search, actually. So we are working on semantic search with Scala 3. So we already support lexical search, but we're kind of like expanding it towards semantic search as well. And that is going to use language models actually as well. So it's kind of interesting projects. It's not just Scala, but also LLMs. And the platform services enablement team right now is working on open sourcing one of the first projects actually. That's going to be part of our testing framework, a small library called Snapshot for us. And we are also working on dynamic API registry. So right now our API registry is based on compatibility checks. When you kind of commit something to the source control, we use GitHub, and we are expanding that to do dynamic checks when you deploy. I think that's all about my two teams.
Nice. And so what sort of like queries do you expect to do like with this semantic search? Like what sort of things you will be able to search that you can't do at the moment?
Good question. So I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but we have a lot of content. We have a lot of exclusive content as well. And our content, because, like when you submit something to the database, a lot of content might not be tagged properly. So when it comes to semantic search, it's not going to be actually semantic search itself. It's actually going to be using large language models to generate a better content understanding of that content. So for example, we're going to try and generate descriptions out of transcripts. And that will actually drive better search features as well, and also better recommendations. That's the kind of idea and the goal. But when it comes to like semantic search capabilities, we might actually take it slightly further. And for example, you might be able to search for something like, was like a score, or like what was that game, or who won that game, and it might actually give you some sports recommendations when you're trying to search for, one of the NBA games, right? Right now, that's not possible. Like our search is very lexical driven. So whatever has been tagged, or, kind of described correctly in the database, that's what we are going to search for or search on. The idea of that semantic search is to take it slightly further. And one more thing I would actually add here is, because we have a lot of that content, like the users, I think, are only searching for like the most popular or like the latest content. And we are not showcasing a lot of content that we still have in our archives.
Nice. And in terms of scale, I mean, I know that it might be sensitive or you may not be able to share everything you want, but could you give us an idea of the scale of SiriusXM? Like maybe, I don't know, how many users do you have, or like, I don't know, subscribers? I don't know what you're allowed to share with us.
Makes sense. Luka, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty big company. I think we have 33 million subscribers currently. So a lot of people listening at the same time, as you can imagine. And yeah, there's some challenges of scale, but I think we did a lot of load testing prior to our launch in December, and there's been a few like scale up events we've had for like launches since then. But yeah, I think we've managed to engineer a pretty good product. Haven't had any big issues so far, at least
Nice,
around
yeah.
scale.
It must be very tricky to launch such a massive product. Like, did you somehow like stage the launch, or like allow to like a limited amount of users, or did you really open the gates and let everyone use it at once?
Yeah. Basically, as we were rolling out the system, I think like maybe over a week or so. So we kind of switched over clients gradually, and I think that's kind of the standard if you push a new update to like the Android Play Store or the iOS App Store, where over time people will update. So it wasn't a huge floodgate release, but I think like pretty big traffic kind of very soon. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what do you use for load testing the application to ensure that it was able to sustain this kind of load?
Yeah, I don't think we have like a standardized tool that every team uses. I've seen like Gatling being used, but yeah, I'm not sure. I think there's a ton of other things you've seen, Damian, maybe.
Yeah, I think it depends on the team. So within the development teams, we use Gatling. Some teams, I think, even use Locust. Some teams actually run their load tests from step functions. But I think even that is Gatling under the hood. It's just that the application happens at the end, so they can use like multiple instances to do like a load test. But we also have platform-wide load tests, and for this, there's going to be a dedicated team to run those tests. And for those, we actually evacuate regions on AWS, and that traffic is isolated. And that team is actually going to run kind of like region-wide load tests for the whole platform. So like if the teams are, for example, feeling like launching a new feature that is really important, they can always reach out to the team and launch a slightly bigger load test that they can do within the team. But yeah, I think mostly it's Gatling, and once again because of Scala. But I've seen, I think, some Locust examples as well.
Yeah, I think Gatling is a fantastic tool. Like I even used it in my first Scala job back like 12 years ago. It's really cool. Like and it's using Scala, and now it's used in many languages. So I think it's a great success story. Nice. And so in terms of the usage you have of Scala at SiriusXM, so could you tell me a bit like how do you use it? Is it more like for data analytics, for backend services, for something else?
Yeah, for our domain, it's the main language used for all of our backend services. Basically, we have like what's now kind of standard microservice architecture. We make heavy use of like CDC. So we have our services that write to like DynamoDB to keep the current state, and then based on that, we get like change data events, process them using like a Lambda, and then they go into the data lake for analytics at the very end of it all. And we have like different consumers for different events. Some of them are not driven by CDC. Have like semantic events, for example, when a user fails authentication, might not change the state, but we might want to take some action based on that. But yeah, at least on our side, basically everything is in Scala on the backend side. And I think kind of, all the new features, the platforms we are writing on the backend, it's all Scala.
Very cool.
It might be worth mentioning it's Scala free, right? Like we don't have Scala 2.13 or 2.12. We are Scala free first because we just launched back in December. So when we started writing this new platform, we actually decided against Scala 2, which is when we're Scala free as our like major
and
language
when did
version.
you start this project for the new platform?
Less than 2 years ago.
Okay, well, it's pretty fast. And could you tell me a bit, like, the size of your development team, like in Scala? So roughly how many people are working in Scala at Sirius?
So for platform services, which is backend that is kind of like user facing, I think we have around 250 Scala developers, less or maybe more, maybe less. And 250.
Nice.
Or so.
It's very nice to see this. I find it quite interesting that there are actually many companies, I mean, not many, but there are quite a few companies like Sirius that have a large number of Scala developers, but are not necessarily well known to the public. So it's very cool to see you actually writing a new Scala application with such a large team and having success with it. Nice. And Scala comes in many flavors. Like you have the reactive type with actors. You have the functional stack, the more Java++ stack. So how would you define the kind of Scala that you write at SiriusXM?
Yeah, I would say we are very heavily invested in like type level functional stack. So at least all the code I've seen is like pure functional Scala using Cat's Effect 3, FS2, HTTP4S, kind of like the classic trio for backend services.
Nice.
Yeah.
Also, one library that I've heard from Jacob that you're using is a Smithy 4S, I believe. So this is something I actually discovered recently. Could you tell me a little bit about Smithy and Smithy 4S? What do they do exactly?
Yeah, for sure. Smithy is basically a modeling languages for API endpoints or APIs in general. And so what we do, we call it, I think, contract first development, where, if you have any kind of client server relationship, we basically write the contracts in Smithy before we start any development. So it can really structurally define an endpoint using this very simple language, Smithy, and that gives you an API. And then basically from that, Smithy 4S is the tool that generates the client and the server boilerplate. It does it in Scala 3 using Cat's Effect, but there's many other generators you can kind of plug into it. It's very big at AWS, all of their I'm pretty sure, maybe not all of them, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of the AWS APIs are written using Smithy. So that makes it very handy. You can kind of just generate all of the boilerplate, and then basically every endpoint just becomes a very simple method that you have to implement in Scala. And the integration, with Cat's Effect and everything is super seamless. It works really, really well. Calling an endpoint somewhere is as simple as calling a function. And
so all of the plumbing is from Smithy, you can generate both the client and also the server logic, and also all the DTOs, JSON stuff or JSON or XML or whatever you're using.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean,
very cool.
I wouldn't say the server logic necessarily, right? You still have to, but the way you plug in the logic, basically. Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think that it's kind of the interesting code. I always find it I spend so much time just describing the endpoint, the DTO, or keep it in sync with the documentation or this sort of stuff, which is it's important, but it's not really meaningful code for an organization. So it's cool if you can automate it.
Yeah. One other benefit is you get Swagger documentation for free. It just gets generated, and then you can just use Postman, curl, whatever you want to just kind of use the schema as is. It's very useful.
Yeah, because my main experience with writing backend services is more I generally use something like Tapier, which in Scala, and then it automatically generates the Open API, Swagger API essentially. But here you do the other way around. You kind of generate the contract first, and then you generate all the code, the Scala code for free. So what do you find the benefit of these two approaches? So you prefer the second one, right?
I actually think there's a reason for it. And the reason is that for us, Smithy is not just for the backend services. It's also for client engineering, it's also for data engineering teams. It's also for machine learning teams. It's like, when we, use Smithy or define a Smithy contract, it's actually going to be used by a lot of those different teams that are not necessarily using Scala. Like, for example, on the client side, we also have Rust, we have Swift, we have Kotlin and others. It's like, you don't really want to be, just forcing a library on someone. Like with Smithy, like we have our own tooling actually for each of those languages on top of Smithy for us as well. So like for us, Smithy was important because like we can all, for example, define a contract and then go and develop in parallel. And the contract stays the same, right? So like when client engineering, for example, very often starts before backend engineering gets to work on that new feature. So like for example, they work against stubs, they work against mocks. And then once the feature is, developed by the backend services, they can just switch over the endpoint or switch to the real-time service. It's like for us, that was also important. Where I think with Tapier, it's kind of reversing it, right? Which is like the backend service has to go first, generate open API possibly, and then that can be shared. So it's slightly relying on the backend services to possibly go first when it comes to the road mapping or just scheduling.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, I guess, like the more different clients you have, like, as you said, mobile, web, and so on, the more benefit you get from Smithy, I imagine, because you do all the code generation in different languages. Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
That's correct.
And practically speaking, how do you, where do you define your Smithy file? Like this is something that I've seen different approaches with generally code generation. Sometimes people prefer to like each service has its own like kind of API, and then expose it. Or do you have like a common repository where you put you put all the APIs together and this is like the source of truth for the entire company?
Yeah, it's pretty much the latter. We have like one big repo that holds all of our definitions. It's very interesting because, it allows you to basically, in the Smithy itself, the Smithy definitions, you can define all of the dependencies. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're like a client, you're like, oh, I'm going to depend on these APIs, you get an artifact at the end of it, that basically gives you exactly the dependencies you want. And so you don't have to like manually like, oh, I need the definitions for this, and then I need to generate it. It kind of all like it takes away a lot of that. So yeah.
Does it help also with the code generation? Like, do you have like each service generating the code from the Smithy definition, or do you do it once and for all in like different languages?
So the service itself is going to generate it. So like Luka mentioned, like the API registry we have is going to publish artifacts, but then each service is going to actually import those artifacts. So for example, if I'm developing a service A and I want to call service B, I'm going to include in my SBT build service B dependency. And then service B dependency is going to be generated as part of the SBT process. So when you build the project, it's just going to automatically generate Scala files for you. So it works similar with like Java services, Kotlin services, and others. So for example, if you're using Smithy in there, it's going to just do it as part of the compilation.
Nice. And how do you find the code generation speed? Is it like do you have any trouble with it, or is it generally just fine?
It's a one-time import, right? Like, so it's pretty fast. Smithy has like its own compiler, I guess, or like a verifier that, the model itself is correct. So like you might spend a little time working on the Smithy model, and then you can just like, publish it locally, and then import it into your build immediately. It takes, I don't know, it is a bunch of files if you have a lot of APIs, but typically once you have your definition, you're not going to change it over and over again. So yeah, I would say it's not one of my big pain points.
Yeah, makes sense.
And to add to it, there's also like SBT modules, right? So like if you're gonna generate, for example, Smithy code as part of one module, then even if you're working on another module, like it's not gonna recompile every time you just type SBT compile, right? It's only going to recompile when those files actually change. And all of our artifacts are versioned. So for that to happen, you would actually need to bump the version.
I see.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break from the podcast to chat about something exciting for all your developers out there. You know the struggle of finding the perfect job or the perfect candidate, right? Well, ScalaJobs can help. It's a unique recruitment platform that brings developers and recruiters together to create the ideal match. They have a fantastic global network with companies like CoraLogic, Ledger, and Payday using their platform to find top talent. So whether you're a company hiring for that dream developer role or a developer looking for your next big opportunity, ScalaJobs is the place to be. Head over to their website at ScalaJobs.com. And hey, if Rust is your language of choice, they've got you covered there too. Check out rustjobs.dev. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I was wondering about, like, does Smithy let you detect when you break an API? Because this is something that you may want to avoid, especially when you have a public API, or at least want to be aware of it.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say it quickly, but that's what the API registry does for us actually. We have our own tooling on top of Smithy, and we detect breaking changes. We have our own compatibility checks. We also warn on pull requests every time developer raises a Smithy change. Is it a breaking change? Like what other teams are affected? So that kind of is our workflow. And then if it's like a breaking change, for example, like you might not be even able to merge it until you get all approvals, or you have to tag a pull request with a specific label saying this is a breaking compatibility, but we are doing it, for example, for a reason. And we know this is going to work because, for example, it's a new API that has not been integrated with yet.
Yeah, a lot of time what I've seen in practice is, instead of breaking the API, we create a new one and then deprecate the old one. That's actually kind of nifty because as you put like a little deprecated flag in your Smithy code, and then the generated Scala code will also come as deprecated. And so as you like bump the version as a client, you'll see like, oh, please migrate to the newest version. This version is deprecated.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Nice.
I was also gonna say, we don't use Smithy just for REST APIs. We also use it for events. So Luka mentioned change data capture at the beginning. we write data to Dynamo, and then we rely on change data capture to publish events to data lake. We are heavy Kinesis users. So for us, Smithy is also used on that side of the world where both consumers and producers of domain events also use Smithy to enforce the contracts. So as a consumer, we have our own Scala tooling on top of Smithy. So if you're building a consumer, whether that's a service or AWS Lambda, you're gonna, for example, include an artifact that is gonna listen to a specific domain event on a specific Kinesis stream. And Smithy Scala kind of enforces all those checks for us as well. And the same goes for the producer, right? Like you cannot, for example, publish something that is not compatible with your Smithy. Like you have to be Smithy compatible to publish to a Kinesis stream. So we kind of took Smithy further, not just REST APIs. We also do it in the async world.
Nice. And you said that so you developed some tooling on top of Smithy. Is it something that you aim to open source at some point, or is it some kind of or you want to keep it internal?
Good question. Very good question. So we are actually starting to think about open sourcing. We are actually open sourcing our first library. I think there are parts of API registry that could be super useful to open source, but there is also a lot of SiriusXM specific code. So I think that those are never going to be open source, but there is definitely a couple of things we are thinking about open sourcing.
Very nice. I'll keep an eye on it. One thing also I wanted to mention is that there is, I just want to double check the name, Jakubowicz. I probably butcher the name, but he has a very nice, he's actually working at SiriusXM, and he has a very nice YouTube channel with a playlist dedicated to Smithy and Smithy for Us. So we'll add the link below the video. I started to watch it and it was very instructive. So I definitely encourage you to check it out.
Yeah,
we can recommend Jakub. He has been leading API registry team for the last 2 years.
Nice. And
that's how I learned about it first before I joined Sirius. It was through the YouTube channel. Yeah.
Also, a question I wanted to ask you regarding Scala is that, so because this is a platform relatively recent, you said like around 2 years ago, what was the company, what was the decision process to choose Scala for this new platform? Like what were, why did you make this choice, if you're aware of it?
Mm. I can tell you my two things, and then I'll let Luka
Yeah.
talk more about why he's maybe writing Scala as well. But for me, there was a couple of reasons. One was we had a lot of developers already familiar with Scala. That was like a major reason. But even then, we had still like SiriusXM expertise before next generation platform was mostly Java. I think there was a couple of teams writing Kotlin. I think there was a couple of teams writing like in other languages as well. So like there was like JVM expertise as well in-house. And I think for the new platform, we have decided to go with both Scala and Java. And then eventually the expertise kind of have shown that like Scala boosts developer productivity, and other teams have started writing Scala as well. So like right now, I think we are at 95% of Scala free. And I think like 5% would be like Java in platform services, right? So like, and those are the teams that either have like no need to switch because they just have Java expertise or are thinking about switching as well. Like for me, that developer productivity was like a really important one. And the second one I would say is like Scala is very mature, and it's actually a bit crazy because when I started writing Scala, that would be like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. We had Play, we had Akka, and back then we could say like Scala is mature. But like the 10 years have passed, and I think Scala is actually much more mature right now. And believe me or not, but like over the last 2 years, I have never seen a complaint about Scala. Like we never had problems with the Scala as a language or its ecosystem or its libraries. Like when we had like problems or developers were stuck, it wasn't with Scala. It was with our other choices, like for example, infrastructure as code. We had more problems there than with other parts of the business. So those two like were very important for me, which was like developer productivity and also like the expertise that was already with us. And I think last one I would say is maybe like, it's strongly typed and you don't have to worry about null pointer exceptions all the time. But maybe I'll let you handle that part for me.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't part of the initial decision making. I joined last summer when, we're already gearing up for launch. And so I can't really say exactly why we chose Scala, but for me, I've been doing Scala for pretty much my entire career. So it's kind of a no-brainer, and I feel like I'm almost like in a bubble. I don't know if I can like actually reasonably say why I use Scala at this point. But I mean, I've spent so much time with it. I think it is a really great language, and it's only gotten better with time with Scala 3. With all of the latest libraries. And when I first started doing open source, it was like pre-CATS 1.0, and we were still doing a lot of, breaking changes here and there. But I think since then, I think it was like December 2017, when CATS 1.0 released, like we've had pretty much zero breaking changes at all. So that's like, 7 years of full compatibility. I think we released a new version of Cat's Effect since then, so there's obviously not full compatibility at all times, but it's been very, very stable. And as much as as like an open source committer, I've wanted to change things a lot. I think like the stability, the maturity, like Damian said, it's really, really valuable for big companies like SiriusXM, where you really need to deliver business value. That sounds cliche, but at the end of the day, it is what we all are hired for, right?
But I think Scala generally had a bad reputation with regard to like backward compatibility, because historically it was true that it was breaking every release.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that for like many years now it's super stable. Even like you can use 213 libraries in Scala 3. As you mentioned, the type level ecosystem is very, very stable. So I think this has been addressed quite a few years ago, and now it's in a great state.
I agree, definitely. Yeah, and generally, I'll say Scala is a really great language. It's so flexible. You can do so much with it, which is an advantage and a disadvantage at times. But for our purposes, like the pure functional style, the type level style, we have a large community, and there's so many problems that we've solved. And like just having so much information at compile time, it's just a huge productivity boost.
I see. One thing I find very interesting is that, the type level ecosystem or generally functional programming has this reputation to be quite complex and has like a steep learning curve. But it seems that, in your case, you managed to grow like a massive team, like taking people who use Java and like train them to use Scala, or you hire new people in a relatively short amount of time. And it seems that you didn't have too many problems, or is it the case, or did you find it difficult to train people or hire people with these particular skills?
So I think for us, there was like a mix of things. Like there was a lot of new hires for sure. Like Luka mentioned, like he joined last year. Like I also joined last year. So like, our platform was actually growing at very fast pace. And also our teams were growing at very fast pace. So like it was a mix of things where we already had functional programming expertise, and like with the new joiners, we were also looking for that functional programming expertise, or at least someone who's familiar with type level stack, CATS and AWS, because that's what we use.
Yeah.
But with the existing teams, like we had fairly good lag as well. Like for example, upscaling Java developers who have never seen or written Scala before. We also had some Java developers or even Kotlin developers who have also never seen Scala, but they, for example, wrote some functional Kotlin, for example, right? Or functional Java in that instance. So like, it wasn't like, that bad. There's definitely a learning curve. Like that's always gonna be there when it comes to functional Scala. I think there's a lot of discussions about direct style to lower that, learning curve. So like maybe that will help with like the first, like, I don't know, few weeks of upscaling, but like our focus has been on functional Scala. But yeah, like I don't think there's like a point of flying here. There's always going to be learning curve. And we definitely saw this during upskilling, but once this like learning curve kind of like, passes, like it's much easier.
I see.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of existing Java today is also like written in kind of like the async style of programming, which I think makes it a lot easier to like make that step into Scala and its world of like IO monads and all that. Yeah,
I think functional programming now is quite mainstream. So, once you understand the main concept, immutability, passing values around, the main issue, I guess, with the type level ecosystem is that you may have like this, like fancy types that may be a bit frightening at the beginning. But I think once you overcome this first, what the fuck is going on, impression, I think it's not that difficult.
Yeah. I agree.
And because you hire for different, like, you're not only using Scala. You mentioned that you have also iOS, Kotlin developers for like your Google application and so on. I don't know if you're involved in this hiring process, but how do you find the difficulty of hiring, let's say, a mobile developer versus hiring a Scala developer? Do you find it easier or more difficult to hire a Scala developer?
I can say straight away, like, we're not involved in mobile hiring. Like, this is a separate organization to us, so we talk to them sometimes. But like, when it comes to hiring itself, like, maybe Luka, you can also like chime in here. But like, I don't think we ever had a bad luck hiring Scala developers. Like, there was always a lot of applicants for our jobs. So, and to be honest, like, this is kind of interesting because like a couple of years ago when we were looking for Scala developers in like, outside Sirius, like I think we had a much worse luck finding someone. Now there's plenty of Scala developers available. I don't know if this is because the market is not great, but there's definitely a lot of, people out there writing Scala.
Yeah.
Nice.
I've been pretty heavily involved with like the interview process for our user services organization. I also can't really speak about hiring any non-Scala developers because I haven't been involved with that at all. But yeah, there's really been we've hired since I've joined, I would say maybe like 5 or 6 people, just in our organization, something like that. So I've done a lot of interviews. There's a lot of really good talent out there. We do like a standard like take home exercise kind of to exhibit like your functional programming in Scala skills. Really nothing crazy. But I've reviewed tons and tons of submissions, and I can really confidently say there's a lot of people with a lot of skill in functional Scala out there for sure. Yeah.
Nice. It's good to hear, because I think some companies complain that they find it quite difficult to hire Scala developers, but some like find it relatively easy. So I'm trying to figure it out, like essentially what is the secret, like why if you have an idea of why are you in a relatively nice situation with regard to hiring? Do you think it's the tech choices that you made, the hiring process, maybe the compensation you offer? What do you think is the main advantages that Sirius has?
Yeah, I think like being remote obviously is a big help. You can hire from literally anywhere. I think that's one of our biggest advantages. I think SiriusXM at this point, like once you realize how many people here work in Scala and write this like type level functional Scala code, I think it attracts a lot of like, I want to say like enthusiasts that are really like into Scala, like I think myself included. And yeah, I think it makes it attractive. I think the pay is pretty good. I don't have a ton of comparison points, but yeah, I think we offer like a pretty good package all around, I would say.
Yeah, so essentially it's a combination of like you having an interesting tech for people, having like remote friendly approach and decent salaries essentially.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
again,
think so.
I don't have a ton of comparison points, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but
From what
I
I've
think
seen, we have tons of applicants. Yeah.
nice. And with regard to the hiring process, what do you find like the stage where the most applicants drop off? Like, what is the most difficult stage among your interview process?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So what I would say actually is maybe not the Scala itself, but like we have a stage where we discuss a lot about distributed systems, AWS. Like we are a streaming company. So like we don't just write Scala, like we also have to take care of the infrastructure. We have this model where you kind of like, you build it, you run it, you support it. So like we also require that AWS knowledge. We also require maybe not AWS per se, but like cloud knowledge, or at least knowledge of working with queues, streaming technologies, different types of databases. We have, SQL, NoSQL. We have even graph databases now. It's like expertise with that is definitely a thing when we really appreciate it. And then I think you can get into the domain specific knowledge as well, right? So like you have multiple candidates for something like user services where there is an expertise that might be needed with like identity systems, OAuth and others. So it kind of like stacks up, right? So like you have Scala and then AWS and then kind of domain knowledge. So I think a lot of, candidate dropouts we had was maybe their Scala was great, but like they haven't had, for example, cloud experience at that time. And at that time, we actually needed some of the cloud experience because there was a lot of new infrastructure being introduced. Now I think it's slightly different where we might also find time to train some folks up. Like if you don't have, for example, cloud experience, like we might still give it a go because like we have now teams that are able to train you up, which wasn't the case like, 2 years ago when we were still like building like literally net new platform. And it wasn't just building services. It was also building Lambda, standing up databases and so on.
Yeah, I think it generally makes sense to hire like more experts at the beginning of a project that have like good technical knowledge on all the tech stack. And I guess the more people you have on in your team, you can kind of a bit like lower the requirements or have people more specialized. Makes sense. And I believe, Damian, your team is hiring at the moment. So is it correct? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. It's not just my team, actually. There are other teams also hiring. So my team is hiring for a staff engineer in the UK for a search team to work on both lexical and semantic search. But we're also hiring for an associate director for search. That's to lead the search team. And in addition to it, I think there's also a staff engineer role open in the UK for a privacy team and auto orchestration team. So there's a couple of different roles, I think, open on the website. I don't think we're doing a great job at promoting them, but there's multiple opportunities available.
Nice.
I don't know, Luka, if you're hiring right now, anyone?
I think we actually just filled 2 positions, so I'm not sure if we're hiring right now, but probably soon again. I think we're always trying to expand at some point.
Yeah, I'll add a link to your career team, and people can check it out, and yeah, hopefully soon. I mean, if you have like such a large team, I guess there is always some sort of turnover. People are always leaving eventually or doing something else. So nice.
For sure.
Well, it was very nice to meet you, Luka and Damian. I really appreciate the discussion. I really encourage people to check out SiriusXM and your career. And do you have any last word you want to say?
Well, Scala in production, I guess. Kind of cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Your tech stack looks amazing.
It's super fun. There's a lot of really cool stuff. And yeah, I think, there's a lot of doom and gloom about Scala, but how it's past its prime or whatever. But I feel like, it's very live. We're doing a lot of really cool things. Yeah, I'd recommend it.
Amazing last word. Thanks, Luka. See you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julien.
Thank you so much for having us. Bye.